This is one of those projects I love because it allows me to do the one thing that I love to do the most, and that's shop at thrift stores. It's also a project that allows you to use miscellaneous things and fabrics that you have hidden away in your stash. So welcome to another edition of Out of the Jar, where I have taken all of my sewing projects that I had hiding away in my closet, and I've put them on slips of paper and put them here in this jar. And when I finish a project, I get to choose the next one. And I never know which one comes next. And if you watched my last video, you know at the end I chose number 6. Number 6. Inside this bag are a bunch of different garments that I'm going to put together to make this underdress to have all these different layers of ruffled skirts on the bottom. So let's talk about what was in that big bag that I pulled out of the closet. And we'll set this aside for a minute. In there was a piece of an eyelet skirt. Gonna be nice for a ruffle. I have this white sundress that has some really great detail on the bottom. There is a navy lace dress. Really pretty. And this navy cotton dress. Also in the bag, I have 2 brand new pieces of fabric. One is going to be used for the top part of this underdress. And to show you what I'm actually going to try to recreate, I actually found this underdress at a thrift store. And this gray stretch knit is going to be the top half of the underdress. And this blue paisley print, I've decided not to incorporate it in this underdress. I'm going to make it into Butterick 6056, which is a nice oversized shirt, which will go well over the top of this dress, as well as this combination. And now for the second dress that I'm going to make, because I'm actually going to make 2 of these underdresses. I had this very colorful skirt hiding away in my stash. And I really like the colors that are on it. And I thought, you know what? This calls for a trip to the thrift store to see how many colors I could match. And I found this purple top. Goes very well. A nice bright white top with pretty lace at the bottom. And a very interesting yellow and orange ombre dress. And so now that I have all of this washed and dried, it's time to cut all of this apart. To make a copy of this underdress, I folded the front and back in half and pinned it together down the side seam and at the shoulders. I'm using this roll of plain white paper to make my pattern. I've seen people use the back of wrapping paper to make their patterns, but you can use whatever works best for you. Now, I am not an expert at doing this, and one would think this would be simple with not a lot of seams and both the front and back being cut on the fold. But for me, it was a bit challenging, and after tracing out the front piece, I had to do it a second time because when I laid the front and back side seams together, they did not match up. Then it clicked, hey, let's get out the ruler and measure things, and that helped a bunch. Now I can cut out the fronts and backs from the gray stretch knit. This fabric is very lightweight and will work well here in Florida no matter what the temperature is outside. When it's warm, I will be wearing a very lightweight oversized top over this dress, and in the winter, lots of sweaters. Before I sew the tops together, I wanted to get an idea of the layout for the layers of the skirts, and I'm starting with the bright colored one. I have already cut most of the garments up into sections, and now I need to trim them into workable pieces so I can make layers. The lining from the orange and yellow ombre dress will be the base layer for this skirt. I then spent the next half an hour moving these layers around, trying different combinations till I was happy with what I thought to be a final look. For the navy and white skirt, I'm using the lining from the navy plaid dress for the base layer. I will also be adding a wedge to the one side seam to make it wider at the top edge. And after playing around with all of these pieces, I decided to only use the navy lace and the 2 white sections. I really didn't like the look of the navy plaid. With the top sewn together, it's on to the neckline and armholes. Now on the original underdress, it's wrapped with a binding, but I'm going to show you what I think is an easier method, like this. And yes, I turned mine around backwards as this seam is supposed to go on the back. To cut this binding, you first need to measure your armhole or neck opening. Whatever that measurement is in total circumference, you then minus 10%. This ensures when you sew it on that it pulls the opening in slightly and doesn't bow out. My armhole opening is 8.5 inches. In total, that's 17 inches. I will then take off 10%, which is about 1.5 inches. I then add back in 1/2 inch for the seam allowance and cut my strip 16 inches long. These strips are 1.5 inches wide, and no, it does not need to be cut on the bias as this is a two-way stretch fabric. Next, fold your strip in half and press it flat. I like to press it flat first before sewing the ends together as I find it easier than when it's sewn together, pressing it in a circle. To sew on the binding, fold it in half and place a pin at the halfway point. Pin the seam of the binding to your underarm seam, and then pin the halfway point of the binding to the halfway point of your armhole. This does not necessarily mean the shoulder seam, because the back of the armhole opening is usually larger than the front, so your halfway point is not your shoulder seam, it's to the back of it. Then stretch to fit the rest of the binding to the armhole and sew it in place. And then repeat the process for the neck opening. Just be sure to put the seam of the binding at the center back. Now it's on to the skirts, and I'm starting with the navy. I've already gone ahead and sewn in the wedge to the front and back at the one side seam so the top opening is larger. The first layer to go onto the skirt base is the navy lace, and I sew 2 rows of gathering stitches at the top edge. The navy lace is shorter than the base layer, so I'm placing the bottom scalloped edge just below the hem of the base. At the top of the lace, I'm marking a row with chalk so I can sew the lace on in a straight line. When pulling gathering stitches, you always want to pull the bobbin thread because it's generally looser than the top thread and slides through the fabric easier, reducing the risk of your thread snapping while you're pulling it. I also find it very helpful to have the skirt over the end of my ironing board and pulling the gathering stitches in sections. Once I have it pinned into place, I turn the skirt inside out so I will be sewing inside the tube. Next is a short white ruffle, and the plan was to move the left side section to the right side to hide the seams in the back, because this layer was to sit on the left side of the skirt. But I ended up doing it the opposite way by accident, so it will be on the right side of the skirt. It also gets the 2 rows of gathering stitches and gathered to the top of the skirt. Next is the longer white section, and I've opened up one side seam, hemmed the edges, and will gather it to the left side of the skirt. With my skirt finished, I'm ready to attach the gray top, which I pin on at the side seams and the center front and back points. Then stretch it to fit the rest of the skirt. And I don't like this at all. The long white layer is too long compared to the short white ruffle, so it needs to be shortened about 3 inches, like this. And no, the more I stared at the short white ruffle, the more I hated it, so I took it off and revisited the idea of using the navy plaid in some way. And if you're wondering, yes, it was relatively easy to remove the stitching to detach the top from the skirt. And after playing around with the plaid, I decided I wanted the white ruffle to stick out from the bottom of the plaid fabric. In order to do that, I cut the plaid in half, sewed the white ruffle to the bottom of the smaller of the two pieces, gathered the larger piece of plaid onto the smaller piece because it doesn't need to be gathered, and then sewed this section back onto the skirt and reattached the top. My. That was a learning experience. I'll show you the results of that one at the end of the video. But now it's on to dress number 2. And with that being said, I thought it best to revisit these colorful layers to be sure I wasn't going to have to redo this one over and over again. And I was correct in doing so, as the dark orange layer kept sticking out to me. Now there's a lot of red in the multicolored skirt, and I thought, let me go see if I have any red cotton fabric at all hiding away in my scrap bins, and sure enough, I had some pieces of a skirt. But it clashed, so I've decided that this skirt will have 4 items: the yellow ruffle, the purple top, the white shirt with the lace, and the multicolored skirt. I started by cutting open one side of the yellow ruffle, trimmed most of the orange from off the bottom, and opened one side of the white shirt. Since the purple top is not very wide in circumference, I'm going to be adding a section from both sleeves to each side so I can gather it to the skirt. Once those are attached, I've got to break out my cover stitch machine to match the hem of the shirt. And the purple is the first layer to get gathered onto the left half of the base. Next is the white layer with the lace. Third is the yellow ruffle, which gets gathered on to the right half of the base. As a note, I have finished off the top edge of each of these layers with my serger machine because none of these 3 layers is long enough to go all the way to the top of the skirt base. You won't see this edge under each of the layers, but the serging helps keep the fabric from fraying in any way. Finally, the colorful layer. Since there is a huge amount of fabric in this piece, I needed to cut it down. I first measured how much length I needed and cut across the skirt. For the gathering amount, I'm cutting the length to be approximately double the width of the base. Then I sew the ends together and gather it on to the top of the skirt. Well, this brings us to the final step, sewing on the top. Sorry I did not film me sewing on the colorful layer, as it is the same process as all the other layers I've sewn on once they were gathered and pinned in place. I can honestly say that this skirt came together a whole lot easier than the navy skirt did, and I am very excited to see all the different outfits I can create with my oversized tops and sweaters, which means it's time for a photo shoot. Time for some final thoughts and the things I learned along the way during this project. First, the negatives. For me, not having a pattern to use and flying by the seat of my pants is a lot more stressful and time-consuming. I am not a pattern drafter, and it's why I feel more comfortable when I have a pattern to go by. I will say I learn more where my handicaps are, and it's good to keep learning because it sharpens my brain and brings out more of my creative nature. Second thing was that this gray fabric is very stretchy, and for the amount of layers that I used, it pulled things down quite a bit more than the original. And on this colorful dress, it hung way down on one side where the yellow ruffle was, and so I had to shorten this side of it quite a bit so that my skirts would hang straight. For the positives, I like the way they fit, and I don't mind the fact that they fit very loose under my tops, as I didn't have to fuss with creating a waistband like you do in a normal skirt. I love the way they look with all of my different tops, and I am thrilled that I got to use a whole bunch of thrifted garments to create these different looks. And most of the tops that you saw in my photo shoot were things that I recently bought from the thrift store. So I hope this video inspires you to try something new. When we as sewists step out of our comfort zone, it can spark new creativity that you didn't know existed. For me, this project showed me that I can recreate something I've seen online. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that like button and stay tuned as the sewing madness continues.